Welcome back, everybody. Now, preparations are underway as South Africa chairs the 15th BRICS Summit at the Sandton Convention Centre in Johannesburg from Tuesday to Thursday next week. The event will be held under the theme BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, Sustainable Development and Inclusive Multilateralism. Some of the topics up for discussion are accelerating infrastructure development through government, business and private partnerships, the BRICS Manufacturing Forum and Oceans Economy. Karabo Mashugane, the Managing Director at 2020 Insight, joins us now virtually to discuss whether business has actually benefited from the BRICS partnership. A very good morning to you, Karabo. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Cynthia. Thanks for having me.
What's your view, first and foremost, of the BRICS 2023 coming to South Africa, and what are your expectations?
Yeah, I think it's extremely exciting, especially given that, it's not just limited to the BRICS members, but, as you mentioned, I think about 40 or so countries have been invited. And so there's going to be quite a lot of, opportunities to have engagement and discussion with a variety of countries and obviously, especially with the key BRICS members.
So the theme of this summit is BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, Sustainable Development and Inclusive Multilateralism. Have we seen any accelerated growth, sustainable development and inclusivity?
I think the key thing and the focus, for example, with the financing that the BRICS Bank has is on developing the infrastructure, especially for the member countries. But even outside of it, for example, that the BRICS member, the BRICS Bank itself has got members that are outside of the key members of the BRICS, of the 5 members. So Egypt, I think UAE and Bangladesh, actually members of the bank, and it seeks to expand itself in order to increase its financing, access to finance also. So internally within the country, the BRICS Bank has done quite a lot of work to support infrastructure development. They funded projects, I think, a total of about 5.6 billion rand. And just, I think, the other day, they were releasing, issuing a bond in local currency to raise rand-based funding so that they can also finance. So, it does provide that support to infrastructure development, which then supports trade, which then supports, economic development and transformation.
You speak of infrastructure development at quite length, Karabo, but it's always said that policies and agreements are only as good as the paper that they're written on it if they are not implemented. So in this particular case, you mentioned infrastructure would be, of course, the first sign that shows that African countries are ready to trade with each other within the continent's borders. So are the African countries capacitated enough, to roll out their infrastructure at favorable times? I mean, be it physical and digital, that is needed for ease of business?
We're not 100% there yet, but I think we're getting there. And, it's quite encouraging, I think, the focus and how South Africa specifically has taken a stance to, view its membership within BRICS, not just as South Africa, but in the context of the entire continent, and that's reflected also in the theme of the hosting. So to look at our development, because as a country, we're quite small in terms of what we can contribute and bring to the table there. But if we then come through as a representative of the country or SADC, then we actually then have quite a lot to offer. And in terms of trade, etc., and through stimulation of our own economy, investment then, and also infrastructure development in our neighboring countries, etc., and stimulating and growing them, we then grow markets. Because one of the key challenges, and I was listening to some of the interviews that the CEO of the BRICS Business Council, that the trade between South Africa and these members is still largely where we export raw materials to them. And then they then bring back beneficiated and developed products. And so to try and reverse that, but it becomes very difficult when you consider that, within, for example, India and China, they obviously have a huge drive to grow their own economies and to catch up and surpass the West. And it then, and with the education levels, with the size of internal markets, etc., it becomes very difficult, for example, for some of the small businesses in our country to seek to export manufactured products to China, when China itself is a manufacturing sort of country for the entire world. And so where we should, I think, be focusing on is, especially through these sort of engagements, is how do we import some of the technology, some of the skills that are there, so that we can then use them to develop ourselves and to contribute to the development of the continent. And in that way, grow internal markets here and increase trade within the continent. And I think that's the key focus.
And what sort of spillovers and benefits has the country seen with the presence of, the BRICS and South Africa partnership? Has business, and especially the SMMEs, because that's a grey area, the SMMEs been impacted in any way? And how could business, including such SMMEs, capitalize on the BRICS partnership with South Africa?
It's a lot of it. I mean, there can be, I think, obviously, especially for the larger businesses, engagements directly. For small businesses, it's a bit more difficult. And I think the responsibility there is then for the large businesses, for government, when they do these large projects, to then try and within that then incorporate small businesses in the value chain. I was having a discussion with the CEO of the local BRICS bank, Mr. Monagalasum, just the other day, and mentioning that they provided quite a bit of financing to different government institutions for local infrastructure development. And it is then the responsibility of those institutions to look when they're developing the infrastructure to see how do they then incorporate small businesses as part of the value chain and use some of that funding to fund small businesses to enable them to participate. Because it's very difficult from a BRICS perspective to then try and micromanage that sort of flow through to small businesses and create a small business desk when we have so many institutions locally that are geared at doing that. So the key thing is to find these projects, find huge projects that big business can get into, and then through Department of Small Business, FIFA, etc., to then look at how do you incorporate small businesses as part of the value chain and provide their financing. So the key role of BRICS and that financing that comes through is to stimulate, to create the backbone in the infrastructure that then creates opportunity to bring small businesses in.
And one of the subjects to be discussed in this summit is the African Continental Free Trade Area, or the AfCFTA. Now, South Africa has spoken out at length about bringing the whole of Africa on board for mutual benefits. So how much of that is a reality, Karabo? And for example, AfCFTA was launched about 2 years ago. So has there been any indication that Africa is ready to trade within it as a bloc?
I mean, obviously, there is already quite a lot of trade being done. And like I mentioned, that, Egypt itself is a member of the BRICS bank. And so, and there was a summit held, I think, in May this year, just to discuss how jointly they can contribute. So you've got the northernmost country in Africa and the southern, South Africa, that are sitting there, that are part of this formation in a form. And I think there are good opportunities. I think it's not a matter of summits like this. Obviously, this is where long-standing discussions culminate into actual signing of things. And I think, the work has to be done prior to this. If I give you an example, there was a former ambassador to India, South Africa. Ambassador wrote a book on a bilateral relationship between India and South Africa, and that we have really not utilized the friendly relationship, and especially through our engagements with them at BRICS and UN, etc., capitalize very well on that relationship.
Right.
And when you look at it, they've got a specific strategy and targets in terms of how, what they want from South Africa, their engagements with us, what they want to benefit, and they measure those. And we tend to approach them less strategically. And the key drawback that we have is just strategy. I think the BRICS is there to support our economic development strategies.
Right.
But we've got to have a development strategy that we bring forward and we say this is what we want to achieve, and this is what the support that we want from you. But I think the key things that we focus on in the country has been, for example, water and sanitation, supporting that renewable energy, etc. And some of the, I think, the roads projects and stuff that have been funded. And within that, then there is a direct benefit that comes through. It enables us to improve our operating capacity as a country and our trade capacity, and then the flow through. But ultimately, when you look at the ultimate impact, and you look at our unemployment numbers, you look at our economic growth numbers, we obviously are not doing enough, and we haven't done enough. But the opportunities are there. It is for us, I think, to then utilize opportunities like the summit that has come, and our membership in general, and our engagement with the rest of the African continent and SADC specifically, to try and take advantage of those and form a clear strategies, the clear goals and what we want to achieve in the next 10 years, 50 years, and start working towards those.
And I want us to talk about some of the issues we've mentioned, such as water and sanitation, and the energy issues that South Africa is currently grappling with as a potential impediment for making South Africa a gateway to African trade, well, time permitting. But for now, I want us to discuss the low-hanging fruits for business in terms of where to start, because with the number of countries and the need for goods and services on the continent, Africa could very well be the biggest bloc in competition with Europe.
Yes, I think the African continent, our combined GDP, I think, are around $4 trillion or so, and so we are as a continent, obviously a huge market, and big opportunities there for, and I think we're seeing a growing momentum. The visits that the African leaders made to Ukraine and to Russia, to try and support the peace sort of initiative between the two, indicate some of the, I think, the maturing collaborations and working together to try and engage and solve some of the problems. But a big part of I think the objective of that engagement was to also look at how, to ensure that conflict doesn't, to reduce the impact that it has on food security as a continent and the input of grains, etc., from Ukraine and Russia. And so I think that there's a lot of work being done. I think it is maturing, and I think even our relationship with the Western countries, which have tended to be quite uneven, to put it mildly, that our engagement with the BRICS and the engagement with the Eastern sort of bloc of countries has enabled us, and I think is increasing our bargaining powers when engaging with the West. And so there's a lot of potential, I think, flows that come from there. The key thing, again, for me is, we need to have clarity in terms of what is our economic strategy as a country, what is the economic strategy for the continent. We're a young continent relatively. There's huge potential in it, but, we struggle a lot of the times with skills. And through things like technology, we can accelerate skills development quite easily. India, for example, is a supplier of technology skills essentially to the world, and a lot of a part of the West uses Indian technological skills and capabilities in a lot of technology development and in a lot of products that are created. So through that we can actually collaborate and look at how do we source and increase skills development locally using our bilateral relationships with these countries and through the continent. And in so doing, we then, I think, create capacity for us to grow our economies and to develop. And the more an economy grows, the more it increases its internal markets, which then creates further stimulus for that growth. Yeah.
Karabo, unfortunately, we're out of time, but you mentioned that South Africa needs to have clarity in terms of a very clear and concise economic plan. But I suppose it lands, into the credence of whether South Africa really is or could play a role for BRICS literal gateway or an enhanced logistics hub here in South Africa, or, access to African markets with social fails like your load shedding, perhaps, and water challenges. So could Africa, or rather, could South Africa potentially play a role for such a gateway into African markets?
Yes, and I think this is essentially part of the theme of the summit to really try and do that. and not to hoard, or I think even to try and insist that all these opportunities that come through have to come through South Africa. We have to, I think, realize that even if, where China itself directly invests in and works with other African countries to develop them, that creates, because as these countries, as the infrastructure, etc., improves and as their markets grow, that increases the opportunity for South African companies to trade in these countries. So the growth and development of all African countries benefits, in turn, all African countries, ourselves included. And so, yes, I think we can, and I think the intention is there, and this summit will help to do that for us to become a sort of a conduit for some of these engagements. But obviously, there's a lot of bilateral engagement with African countries and some of these members directly. And it's just, I think, an opportunity to grow those. And through doing that, we just raise, I think, the level of economic activity and capacity on the continent. And then that then creates great opportunities. You will know that a lot of South African companies have struggled to expand into the continent due to various reasons, but mostly it's infrastructure. So as much as we're struggling with our own electricity and water issues, they are even worse in some of our neighboring countries, and it makes it very difficult to do business there.
Just a quick one, Karabo, before I let you go. What's your thoughts on the resurgence of non-alignment in the Global South, potentially signaling a possible rising trend in how BRICS member states interpret global matters?
I think there's actually I would think it's the other way. Obviously there's always going to be challenges that increase, but I think there's a growing inclination and desire to see an increase in trade, especially in the Global South, and working together, because I think generally, we would view the West as having taken, in the northern part of the globe, having taken advantage of most of the southern countries where a lot of the mineral wealth of the continent actually sits. And so I think coming together and working together and within the BRICS Council itself, having India and Brazil, for example, as some of the major members of the global southern economy, it creates that platform for us to work together. So there'll always be, obviously issues that come up, but I think the direction in general and the intent is for the global south to grow together, to work together, and to increase our bargaining power, our economies, so that when we're engaging with the North, it's not an extractive engagement, but it is more an engagement where there is mutual benefit in terms of the exports that we provide to them, and how they contribute to our economic growth.
All right, Karabo, great chatting to you. Very great insights there. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Karabo Mashugane, the Managing Director at 2020 Insight. Well, he was discussing whether business and SMMEs in particular have benefited from the BRICS partnership. All right.